Let's look at the last topic of our first probability lesson. We need to talk about what's called a probability distribution, which is very important, is going to carry through the rest of the course. So if you have a question about this at all, make sure you ask now so that it doesn't snowball out of control throughout the rest of the class. So a probability distribution shows the probabilities for all possible values of a random variable. So when we talk about a random variable in probability, the random variable is the values that can be taken on by all the possible outcomes. So for example, if I said we're talking about a probability distribution of rolling a die, then the random variable x, the values that x can take on, would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. So x represents all the possible outcomes. Now, when we talk about a probability distribution, we want to think of this as a list of all the possible outcomes and their corresponding probabilities. So think about it like in algebra, when you make an XY chart, you have an X value, and then next to that, you put the corresponding Y value. Well, that's very similar to when we're talking about a probability distribution. We have our outcome in our X column, and then our Y column we want to think about as our corresponding probability. Now, there are 3 requirements that you need in order for something to be considered a probability distribution. Here are the requirements. Number 1, it assigns a probability to every possible outcome. In other words, we can't skip anything in our table. It has to have all of the possible outcomes listed. Number 2, each assigned probability is a number between 1 and 0. That's true for any probability. You can't have a probability that's over 1 or over 100%. So you want to make sure that all the values in your corresponding probability column are between 0 and 1. In other words, you're not going to see a value in there like 1.5 because that's not going to make sense, right? All of those values in your second column of your probabilities need to be between 0 and 1. And lastly, and what in my opinion is probably the most important, the sum of all the probabilities for the possible values must be 1. So when I add up all of these values, it needs to add to 1 or 100% if you're doing it in terms of percentage. Let's look at our example 10. Consider the probability distribution below. So this is telling us that we have a probability distribution. So this column is all the possible outcomes. And then this column is our corresponding probabilities. This shows the probabilities of a video receiving a certain number of views in thousands. Find the missing probability. Because I know if this is the probability distribution, all of the probabilities should add up to a total of 1. All I have to do to find the missing probability is see what's left over. So if I take 1 and I subtract 0.32, I subtract 0.27, and I subtract 0.14, whatever's left over has to be that probability. So when we work that out, we're going to get that we have, 0.27. So this missing probability here for x is equal to 40 is going to be 0.27. When x is 40, we have our probability of x is equal to 0.27.